Taking the carburetor off of this XR100 is pretty simple. First we'll remove the fuel line and remove the slide by loosening this cap. And get that out of the way. Next we need to loosen this clamp. And we need to take off these two nuts that secure the carburetor to the manifold. We do this with a 10mm wrench. That wasn't very tight. Maybe this carburetor has been off recently. Now it just pulls off. And we'll take this into the laboratory. The first step to clean this carburetor is to remove the float bowl. It's secured by 3 Phillips head screws. I'll just loosen these up. And it's always much tidier to drain the gas out before you remove the bowl, or you'll have a workbench full of gas. In this case, I don't think there's any fuel in it. There's the third screw. Take that off and see what we have. There's the float bowl, which actually doesn't look too bad. It looks like somebody's cleaned it recently. If you open this up and there's a bunch of grime and dirt in there, clean it out with a screwdriver or other object first, and then let it soak in some gas and just clean it out so that there's no more junk in there. This tube right here is the overflow tube. That's so that if the gas level gets too high, it will overflow into here rather than just filling up and going into the intake of the engine. So there's the float bowl. Next we have the floats, which are here, and the needle valve or float valve, which is right here. To remove the needle valve, we need to push this pin out. Nothing secures it, so it should just drop out, or you can use a little nail or pin to get it. Just push this out. I pushed the float hinge pin out enough that I can remove the floats. And this is what I'm concerned with, is this needle valve. On this particular carburetor, the reason I took it apart is because no gas could flow into the carburetor. And here's why. This needle valve should be very easy to move in and out of the valve seat, and as you can see, it's just stuck in there. So I'm going to use some pliers and very, very gently, gingerly, give it a little twist, a little pull. There. It wasn't very stuck, but it was stuck. And there's the needle valve, which interestingly enough doesn't look very dirty. So that's actually serviceable. We'll put this over by our float bowl and look carefully into this valve and clean it out with some gasoline, because any debris that's in here will either make the needle valve unable to move, or it will get stuck between the valve and the seat, causing gas to continually flow, and gas will always leak out of the carburetor if the gas is on the tank, which is a bad thing. So I'll clean that out. So I've cleaned out this needle valve, seat, and the needle valve itself. I just drenched them in gasoline, which is still on my hands. And as you can see now, the valve moves freely in that valve seat. And that's what we're looking for. The next thing to look at are these guys right here. This is the main jet. This is what allows gas to pass through into the engine at high RPM. And this is the pilot jet. This controls how the engine runs at low throttle openings. So first I'll take out the pilot jet. It just requires a small screwdriver, and you can turn it out. I'll just unscrew this pilot jet. And you'll see a few things on this pilot jet. There's some baffle holes that are right here. You should be able to look through those and see light on the other side, which is good. And there's two sets of them, so I should be able to do the same thing here. So those actually all look good. And we also should be able to see daylight through this hole on the end, which I don't. So I'll first give it a little blow, and I can't blow through it, so that's stopped up. That will kill your engine every time as far as the low RPMs are concerned. If this jet is clogged, you will have an inability to idle, and it just won't run very well, if at all. So I'll use a needle and very gingerly clean this out. Don't use a whole lot of force with this, but just a little bit. If a needle cannot be found, you can just soak it in gasoline, or use some compressed air, or use a piece of wire, anything to clean it out so that you can see through it and blow a little bit of air through it. It's a very small hole that you want, but it's very necessary, albeit small. That low speed or pilot jet proved difficult to clear out, so I have it soaking in some gasoline right now. But in the meantime, I will remove the main jet, which is right here on top, and it requires a flathead screwdriver to remove. And this is kind of the same affair as that low speed jet. Just needs to be a hole through there. As you can see, there is, so that is clean. I probably will just soak it in gasoline. So that's ready for service. Next we'll take out this baffle, which is underneath the main jet. I don't know what the technical term for it is. It might be the needle seat. I'm not sure, but remove it. And make sure all these little holes are clean, which they look pretty good. And it should be clean through the bore. This is what the needle slides up and down in, not the needle valve, but the needle underneath the slide that's still on the motorcycle. And as the needle goes up and down in here, it draws more fuel in as the throttle opens. So that actually looks pretty clean, so that's good. And lastly, we can remove this screw right here. But before you do, take note of how much it is screwed into the carburetor, because it's an adjustment screw. So we'll go like this. See, we got 1/2, 1 turn, 1/2, 2 turns, 2.5 turns, 3 turns, 3 1/4 turns. I think that's actually out a little too far, but I'll take note of it. I haven't actually started the motorcycle that this carburetor belongs to, so I don't know how well it runs at that setting for the adjustment screw. But take out the adjustment screw, clean it off with gasoline. It doesn't look bad, but it could probably use a cleaning. And then just blow some compressed air through here to make sure the passage is clean. And it actually looks like it is. You can see through to the other side if I can get some light. Right there. So that looks good. And that's about all there is to the carburetor. We just need to reassemble it now with all the clean parts. I didn't notice it when I took out this screw, but there is a spring that goes down into this as well. So watch out for that. You should also ensure that these tubes right here are clean. These travel back to the jets here. This one at the bottom, you can see the indentation here. It goes to the main jet orifice, and the other one, you can see the indentation of it here, goes to the pilot jet. So make sure those are clear, because those can cause the engine to not run well either. I let my pilot jet soak for a little while, and then I used some very small wire, actually from an old spring that I had, to unclog it. So now it's unclogged, and you might be able to see through it if we hold it just right there. So it's just a tiny little hole, but that's how the engine gets fuel at low RPM. Now I'm going to put everything back together. I'll start with the needle valve. There's a little metal clip that goes on to the valve, and it just snaps on like that, and then that assembly slides on to the float, so it just kind of hangs there like that, and then that is placed into the valve seat, and then push this pin back through here to secure the floats. If you do need to use any force to get this pin back in here, don't use pliers or anything metal to push it, or it'll just mark the shaft here and make it even more difficult to slide in. I'm just going to use the back of this to tap it in there. And I've actually seen these pins that just slide out by gravity, but for whatever reason this one is a little bit tighter, but that's okay. And that's how you reinstall the floats. And you can see when the floats go down, they allow that needle valve to come down, and that's what allows fuel to get into the float bowl. Then as they go up, it seals it off again. Next, I will reinstall this adjustment screw. I'll put the spring in here and the screw. And if your machine was running well when you took the screw out, be sure to return this adjustment screw to where it was before. I'm just going to set this one at 1 3/4 because it was at 3.5 turns out when I started, and I think that's a little too much. And next I'm going to install this main jet seat. And the main fuel jet. And the pilot jet. And next there's this anti-slosh baffle piece that goes on over this main jet seat. This little notch in the plastic should line up with the overflow tube on the float bowl. So we'll put that on like that. And reinstall the 3 screws that hold the float bowl. And that's how to clean it. Now let's reinstall it on the motorcycle. To reinstall, feed the overflow line, if equipped, down where it goes, and then just install the carburetor back on the manifold. And attach the air box. Put this slide back in. It's probably easier to put the slide in actually before the carburetor goes on. Similarly, it's probably easier to get this cap off after you've taken off the carburetor. So we'll screw this on. And I'll put the nuts on here that hold the carburetor to the manifold or intake boot, whatever the technical term is. There's one on each side. And tighten the nuts with a 10mm wrench. Now I will reinstall this clamp. And lastly, don't forget to reinstall the fuel line, or you'll have gas everywhere when you try to turn the gas valve on. So now let's see if it will start. So now I'll turn the gas on and see what happens.